The one and only weakness of the Season 4 premiere of Teen Titans, the episode Don't Change That Dial, is that it doesn't feel like a season premiere at all. It feels like one of those lighthearted levity episodes that we tend to get near the end of a season, right before the finale rolls around. But if that's the only issue that I have with this episode, then clearly it's something pretty special. This episode is one of the Teen Titans' typical goofy comedy episodes, signaled by the fact that the silly Japanese version of the theme song with its nonsense lyrics plays instead of the regular version. But you wouldn't have needed the theme song to tell you that this was going to be a goofy episode this time, as the main villain of the episode is that control freak guy, who, in a sequence inspired by The Outer Limits, announces that he's taking control of TV. And at first the only Titan to notice is Beast Boy, because he's spent apparently weeks sitting in front of the TV doing nothing but watching television, which means I guess this takes place a significant amount of time after the most recent episode of the show. But the other Titans quickly realize that Beast Boy is right when a news report announces the control freak has escaped from prison. And again, this is another example of one of the villains escaping from prison, then seemingly immediately being able to execute a really complex plot with complex technology involved. And then later, when the Titans track Control Freak's signal back to its source and realize that he isn't just transmitting to a bunch of TVs, he's actually gone into the world of television, it makes absolutely no sense, because that's not even remotely how TV works. But it doesn't matter, because Control Freak has always been one of those characters whose powers don't make sense, and this episode does not in any way try to build a logic around those powers, which can be contradicted by how crazy they are, so it ends up working. The Titans, rather accidentally, thanks to Beast Boy, end up following Control Freak into the world of these TV shows and movies that he's been hopping through, and they're able to fully interact with the stuff in these worlds, regardless of whether or not it's a sitcom, a telenovela, or a game show. And even though the implication is that they don't change that episode of the show or that movie permanently, they just change it for that one instance, it's still really interesting to think about. If they can change the events of, let's say, a fishing show, because there was a fishing show in this, if they could change the events of that fishing show, then suddenly does the real person who filmed that episode of that show, have memories of those changes in the real world? Or is some second instance of that person created in the TV world to reenact the things that the real person did? It kind of makes me wonder if anybody's ever written any fan fiction based on this episode exploring those ideas, because they would certainly be interesting to explore. But that's not really what this episode is about. It's about TV and movie references out the butt. Everything from Star Wars to The Matrix to, as I mentioned before, reality TV is referenced in some way in here. There's references to old black and white monster movies. Cyborg gets stuck in a telenovela for a little bit where he's confused for this lady's boyfriend. There's even an XP of Barney where one of the mechanics on the show is used to slow down Robin and Raven when they're close to capturing Control Freak. And what's particularly cool about it is that when they first start pursuing Control Freak, it's soon enough after he's entered this world that he doesn't have any abilities here yet. He's just able to avoid and, in some cases, briefly defeat them using his knowledge of the TV worlds that he's jumped into. And the only Titan whose knowledge is even similar to Control Freak's here is Beast Boy, but it takes him a little while to realize just how valuable that knowledge is. And so because of his great knowledge and his ability to use the mechanics of these worlds against the Titans, Control Freak is able to buy himself enough time to first assemble a bunch of classic villains from classic TV and movies to go after the Titans and stall them even further, but then he's able to bring in tech from various TV and movies, tech that can be used effectively against them, and even take the time to learn a physics-defying Matrix style of Kung Fu. He clashes with them again briefly and is able to run circles around all of them. Granted, they aren't expecting him to be such a difficult opponent, but it's still impressive, and he manages to escape yet again. It's at about this time that the fourth wall is truly broken. It's been leaned on a few times throughout the episode, but it is truly broken when we learn that anyone watching this program, that would imply us as well, is being affected by Control Freak's presence in these shows, that it somehow changed the signal so that it's harmful to the viewer. So now they have to find him quickly, and so they call upon Beast Boy's knowledge. He's able to deduce where Control Freak would be most likely to go next within this world of television shows and movies, and so they end up in an XB for Star Wars. And I don't know if the implication is that it took the Titans a little while to find him, or if Control Freak just has the ability now to absorb powers from the places he visits in this TV realm, if that somehow came with the other abilities he learned previously. But he has force powers and lightsaber fighting abilities in this world now, and so he's even more of a threat to the Titans than he was before, allowing him to put up a fight against them even now when they're expecting him to be difficult. It's only because Beast Boy also understands the mechanics of this particular movie world, or TV world, and Titans, I guess Star Wars is a TV show there, that he's able to defeat Control Freak by calling on a different power, which can be found in this reality. And so the episode ends on one of the singular funniest scenes in the entirety of this series, where the characters stood around and realized that, on one hand, the message of the episode might be not to watch too much television, but then on the other hand, watching too much television saved their lives, so there isn't a message after all. It made me laugh out loud. I thought it was super clever, especially when immediately after they deliver that incredibly funny joke, the camera pans out to reveal that apparently some limited elements from the TV realities they visited have followed them into the real world. The telenovela girl is still hanging on Cyborg, and the episode closes on canned laughter. I love this episode a lot. I'm not sure it's the funniest comedy episode of the entire series, but it's one of the few that's a coherent action plot at the same time. This episode neither tries to establish any logic of its own, or attempts to draw upon the logic of other DC properties, the way that the episode with Larry did, for example. And so it can be as zany as it wants to be, and I never once question it. The various TV and movie references in and of themselves aren't funny, but the way that they eventually end up interacting with each other is, at the very least, the various interactions are chuckle-worthy. The fact that the episode relied on Beast Boy being just as geeky as their opponent in order to deduce how to defeat him was a great touch. Beast Boy's reactions to the various TV-related stuff in this episode was also pretty great. And I have to applaud the episode for actually transforming Control Freak into not only a relatively threatening villain, but one who's also even kind of charismatic. Like, when he inserts himself into these badass TV and movie moments, he comes off as kind of badass. It's neat. The various fourth wall leans and fourth wall breaks are great. I absolutely loved how the episode even brought the audience into it in a limited way, with all that stuff about the TV signals being harmful. That was really cool. I am left wondering, though, does Control Freak retain any of the abilities that he gained in these TV realms outside of them? It's not as if this isn't a DC Comics story universe, after all, where all of these powers also exist in some form, so it would make sense if he got to keep them, but I don't think we actually see him again to find out. Now I'm really curious about whether or not that's the case. At the end of the day, this may not be the funniest episode of the series, but it's definitely up there, and it not only has a cohesiveness that the other comedy series don't. This episode, for example, doesn't have some big montage where most of the funny stuff happens during that montage. The funny stuff happens around the actual legitimate action of the episode. But it also makes you think a little bit too, which is always a nice touch. Overall, this is a fantastic episode of Titans, and while I definitely wouldn't have placed it at the very beginning of a season, it doesn't really hurt anything by being here either. As per usual, the guys, I'd like to know, what do you think of Don't Touch That Dial if you have seen it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord, link in the description. But either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.